So now it's my pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Dr. Hannah Carter. Hannah grew up in Aroostook County, graduated from UMPI, or if you're from away, the University of Maine at Presque Isle. She received her master's and PhD at the University of Florida in agricultural education and communication, where she specialized in agricultural leadership and extension education. I haven't yet had a lot of chance to get to know Hannah, but I already have a pretty clear sense that she was born to be part of Extension. She was a 4-H ambassador in high school and still has her ambassador card to prove it. I somehow missed out on the opportunity to be part of 4-H growing up, but I'm happy to report that my 3 granddaughters are all involved in 4-H in Pennsylvania, including the youngest who just started Clover Buds. Way to go. And at the Mitchell Center, we think of cooperative extension as a kindred spirit. We share their belief in the power of collaboration and in aligning our work with the needs of diverse communities. One example of Hannah's commitment to growing the next generation of leaders can be seen in the creation of a brand new faculty position in Extension that is focused on Indigenous food systems. And they found the perfect person to lead that innovative work, Dr. Tony Sutton, a wonderful colleague who has been part of the Mitchell Center for more than a decade. Please join me in welcoming Hannah to the Mitchell Center.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And it's so nice to be with you all this wonderful fall afternoon. I just want to say there will be no tricks today in this Mitchell Center talk, only treats. And again, just really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this series. And I do feel as well that we are kindred spirits in this important work, talking about how we engage our communities here in the state of Maine in fulfilling our land grant mission. And so with that, I do want to just set the stage, and I do this for any presentation, is manage expectations. I heard several folks today, especially as I was leaving my building, like, you're going to do a great job. We're so looking forward to your talk. I have 2 signs in my office, not 1, but 2, and I have them so I can see it in front of me, and then people can see it behind me in Zoom that says, expect nothing, appreciate everything. So if you had expectations coming into today's talk, just expect nothing and appreciate whatever you can glean and take away, hopefully for your own work. I really like to manage what people are going to come away with today. And I also want to just, again, welcome those who are joining virtually. We are in Cooperative Extension hosting all organization meeting the next 3 days. And it's our first time to be all together as an organization. And we're going to talk about the Extension organization and the size of it. And so we've been solely focused on that to the point where last week, one of our wonderful members of our marketing and communications team sent this announcement to the organization. And I was like, oh, that's on Monday. So if you notice any typos or anything like that, I apologize ahead of time. There's a lot going on, but really appreciate everybody in the room and certainly virtual as well. David gave me, again, such a thoughtful introduction, and I love that. I do feel like who we are and who brought us up plays such a big role in what we do and where our passions lie. And my story is certainly all about rural communities. I'm going to do this for my audience here in person, but how many of you have heard of Aroostook County? Okay, how many of you have been to Aroostook County? Thank you. A few people that, you know, a lot of people forget that Maine continues past here in Orono. You can actually go up 95 for another about 2 hours, and then it does stop. And then you can go even further. But I grew up on a potato farm in northern Maine, and that's when we talk about, again, my roots, they are in agriculture, they are in rural communities. And I feel like that's what's drawn me back to work for Extension here in the state of Maine is what can we do for our rural communities to increase their vibrancy, to increase the opportunities for our rural youth to stay in Maine communities and feel like there is something for them there. And again, I think that's all of our work as we talk about the importance of UMaine to our communities across Maine as far as teaching, research, and certainly in outreach as well. Uh, as David mentioned, I did receive a master's degree and a PhD from the University of Florida in agricultural leadership. My potato farming father thought I was going to teach cows how to be outstanding in their field. My joke for the promise, right? Exactly. That's my only corny joke for the whole entire presentation. But really, what it is how do we build capacity in people? And again, my focus in building capacity in people have been in agricultural and natural resource leaders. And again, that just speaks to who I am and the importance, I think, of that work as we think about, especially the state of Maine and our natural resources, our heritage industries. Again, how do we build capacity in those areas? I worked for about 16 years within Florida Ag and Natural Resources, saw this job coming home and thought maybe it's time that I return back north and see what I could do for the great state of Maine. I came back in 2019 in May. 8 months later, there was a global pandemic. Nobody told any of us what that was going to look like, what that was going to be like. And we could spend a whole other session talking about how the University of Maine as a whole really provided during COVID the communities. What did the communities need? How did the university respond? It's amazing when you look at the work that was done really quickly in the areas of teaching, research, and outreach in response to a global pandemic. And again, we could spend a whole other hour talking about that. I always like to include quotes in my presentations because I feel like people use words a lot better than I do. And I love this quote from E.B. White. Many of you know E.B. White from the great book Charlotte's Web. And I feel like this is how I approach most of my days and how I think we all should approach our days and the important work that we do. So with that, because I do have a degree in education, we do have to have some objectives for today. And these are my objectives. The good news is I had a Diet Coke at lunch, so I can talk even faster than I usually do. The bad news is we don't have all day to have these conversations and to talk about ideas and to brainstorm, but I hope we have, and I will make sure that we leave enough time at the end to answer questions and really think about how can we do this work together and what ideas do you all have and where do the intersections lie in the important work we do. The other thing, as I mentioned before, I like to use quotes, and we're going to talk about kind of the history of land grants and cooperative extension. And again, I love this one from Abraham Lincoln, as he was really the president who at the time, and this was the time at the end of the Civil War, when we think about how this country was, again, in a time of great unrest, of great divide, of coming together to think about a university system that's built on behalf of the people who have invested in this system, their hopes, their support, and their confidence. And I think that is absolutely true today as we think about how we as the University of Maine, as the land grant, fulfill our outreach mission to the people of the great state of Maine. With that, though, I do want to mention UMaine is a land grant university. And right now, and in the time that we are in, we are also, as some people across the country talk about land grants as being land grabs. And if we talk about the history of land grant institutions, we do so understanding that these institutions were built on land that was taken away. And so with that, I would like to do the University of Maine's land acknowledgement statement at this period of time. The University of Maine recognizes that it is located on Marsh Island in the homeland of the Penobscot Nation, where issues of water and territorial rights and encroachment upon sacred sites are ongoing. Penobscot homeland is connected to the other Wabanaki tribal nations, the Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, and Micmac, through kinship, alliances, and diplomacy. The university also recognizes that the Penobscot Nation and the other Wabanaki tribal nations are distinct, sovereign, legal, and political entities with their own powers of self-governance and self-determination. When I talk about why I love a land grant, it's how the mission and vision of land grants came to be. It's not how the actual land came to be that we all sit on as land grant institutions. How the land grant was established, as I mentioned, Abraham Lincoln in 1862 signed the Morrill Act. And this was the idea that federally controlled lands in each state will be given to the states for them to do with what they need to establish an institution of higher learning. These institutions of higher learning focused on agriculture, science, military science, and engineering. Now let's think about the University of Maine today as we think about NSFA and our College of Engineering. We are the land grant, and this is what we were built on. What was interesting about this is, okay, so we've set up these institutions of higher learning for the children of the people of these states to go get a public education in. But what happens is this great work that is done on these institutions of higher education, what are we going to do to get that information that happens on these institutions out to the people who need it? And so with that, in 1887, the Hatch Act was established. And what that did was it established agricultural experiment stations. So we now have researchers here on campus who are doing research in agriculture. How are we going to get that information out to the people that need it? We need research farms so we can show the trials, so we can show farmers what is possible through this research. We're going to talk about our experimental station farms in a minute when I show our map. And then in 1914, we talk Smith-Lever a lot. And that was when the Smith-Lever Act was established. And that was to put actually boots on the ground people who could then take the knowledge that is happening on the campus, on the farms, and take it out directly to the communities and to the people who needed it most. What was interesting too is how are we going to translate that information? We talk about how we translate science. How do we share our science to people who may not speak in our scientific lingo? And again, this is how extension was developed, was to have people who are deeply embedded in these communities, who are opinion leaders, who can go out and say, hey, have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about trying this? And this is also, and you'll see me, and this is why, again, I love extension and I am passionate about it, because this was also the impetus of our 4-H programs. Because what the then thought leaders of the day said, if we can teach the kids, they'll go home and teach their parents. And that's exactly what happened. And again, to date, 4-H is the largest youth development organization in the world. So with that, what land grants became were large public universities with tripartite missions of teaching, outreach, and research. I a lot of the time take outreach out and put extension in because I'm horribly biased towards extension, but it really is teaching, research, and outreach. Extension has a part of that outreach mission, but everybody on this campus has a part of that outreach mission as well. It is not just extension's job. So in 1865, the University of Maine was established as the Maine State College of Agriculture and Mechanic Arts. I'm glad we don't have that on our logo anymore because it is a mouthful. We were renamed the University of Maine in 1897. We are one of the only land, sea, and space grant institutions in the nation. Again, we still are committed to the creation and dissemination of knowledge to improve the lives of the people of the state of Maine. And I will be happy to debate this fact with you because I have had many debates now about this next bit. And again, if you take nothing away, the University of Maine is one of the nation's only land grant universities other than the University of Hawaii, which is on an island. We all know that we are on Marsh Island, but people say, but what about Rhode Island? What about New York? Rhode Island is connected because I got challenged and we dug out the map. And so that's just your fun fact for the day. And we have this bottom part of the slide. We have this counter on our actual website. So this is actually Friday afternoon data. But bottom line is the University of Maine Cooperative Extension has been around for 108 years. We're a very old and traditional organization, but we are also as relevant today as we were 108 years ago. And I look forward to, again, sharing some of those ways that we continue our relevance. I mentioned this, we are a statewide presence. We like to say we're bringing the university to you. You will see by this slide, you will see our county Cooperative Extension offices in purple. We have 16 county offices. We do have two offices that are paired counties. So Androscoggin, Saginaw share an office, Knox, Lincoln share an office, which means that Aroostook County has 3. That wasn't my doing. That's the way it's been. It wasn't that I put extra offices in Aroostook County, but again, just from a geographic perspective, you'll see. I mentioned, remember the Hatch Act that you saw 2 slides ago, the establishment of our experimental research farms. You will see those with the farm symbol across the state. We do have extension folks that are do their research and do some of their outreach on our experiment and research facilities. We have 4 4-H camps and learning centers across the state. And we also have extension that are involved in Maine Sea Grant at different locations around the coast. What I wanted to put this in, so in the corner, you'll see that I just tucked away our numbers of people because I think it's important. And again, as we have conversations across campus about what is the campus community going to do and what does this look like for our faculty or our staff, we have to remember that even just in extension, we have about 170, 180 people that work for the University of Maine, but they don't work here on Maine campus. And so again, we like to say that we are the face or the front door of the university because when you walk into a county extension office, it's all about UMaine. And it's all about connecting again to UMaine. And I think that's really important to understand. And I also think it's really important for the university to have that local presence in all the counties. What is happening? What are you hearing? What is going on? Where are there opportunities, boots on the ground? And so to have that presence is really extraordinary. I think the other thing to mention too, as we talk about connecting as a system, our Fort Kent Extension office is actually on the campus of the University of Maine at Fort Kent. Our Holton office is on actually the University of Maine at Presque Isle, their adult learning center. And we're really pleased, actually, our Washington County Extension office just moved into an on-campus facility at the University of Maine at Machias. Again, how do we increase those collaborations? It all comes down, though, to money, because unfortunately, this does take money to make it work. And I feel like it's interesting as we talk about connecting to communities when you're based on campus, or if you have what I call a more traditional appointment of teaching and research, how do you get out to do this work? Where does the funding come from? And so I wanted to speak a little bit about extensions funding. There is no quiz on this. It is messy in a way, but it's also, I believe, brilliant in another way. We talked about the Smith-Lever Act, which established extension. We still receive from the United States Department of Agriculture Smith-Lever funds. They come as a grant. You have to apply for them, but they are called Smith-Lever capacity funds. And that funds about a third of the work that we do in cooperative extension. Obviously, because they are federal funds, there's a lot of reporting requirements that go into them. One of the things about Smith-Lever that's interesting is Smith-Lever requires a one-to-one match from the university to receive these funds. So as many funds as we get from the federal government through Smith-Lever, the University of Maine has to say, okay, we're going to match those funds. That's where you see our state match, which is the University of Maine. The other interesting thing as we think about how extension was created is, again, it is in all of our communities and in rural communities. So there is a requirement that we have a local funding piece, and we do that through our counties. There's actually in state statute, the County Extension Act. So every county in the state of Maine, we can go and request county funds to support local efforts in cooperative extension, and we still to this day request those funds from every county. It's an interesting debate that we are in right now. Again, extension is over 100 years old. It used to be, and many people remember this, that all of extension, quote unquote, was free. It was part of the public service, public outreach of a public university. But what we have found, again, especially in tough budgetary times, the idea of revenue generation is really important as we think about doing the important work that we do. So we do have some fee for services because we just need to recoup what it costs to provide that service. I think one of our best examples of revenue generation, I mentioned we have 4-H camps and learning centers across the state. Those are all actually run through revenue generation. So they actually, send your kids to camp, generate revenue, which helps pay our staff and run our programs, and it goes on. And I'm going to talk about some of our other revenue generation opportunities in a minute, because I think that's really important as we think about, especially the future, not only of extension, about and some of the other work we do for our communities. Is there an opportunity to think about what that would look like as far as revenue goes? We do a lot of contracts and grants. A lot of our faculty are involved in grantsmanship, which is excellent because we are able to hire some, grant funded faculty lines through those opportunities. What is interesting is, and again, we get this a lot too, is if it's a federal grant, what is the local impact? What if you're doing this work again at the federal level through a grant? What is the opportunity for the state of Maine to still actually benefit from that opportunity? And many of the times, it's actually what that grant's all about. But there's always some way, I believe, that we can apply what we are doing, even in specific focus areas, to again meet the needs of the state. We do have some private giving and we do have some targeted state appropriations as well, but that gives you an idea of our funding structure and again, how we do the work we do. What we do in extension, at the end of the day, it is not just about farms and 4-H as it was when we started 108 years ago. We certainly have diversified our portfolio quite a bit. Really, again, it all comes down to how do we provide science-based research and information to the people who need it? And whether that is just a homeowner that needs help with their tomato plant or would like to enroll their child in the Cloverbud 4-H program, or it's an industry that has a need, but that's really provide practical how-to solutions based on research, provide research-based information. Certainly here in Maine, we have a large part of our extension programming in regards to increasing capacity around Maine agriculture. But then again, how do we develop and deliver educational programming for the continuum of learners? And I always like to use this. When we talk about learners, as far as the university goes, the traditional thought is folks who come to campus and work on a 4-year degree or a graduate degree. In extension, we talk about the continuum of learners because again, we want the young folks who go to our 4-H camps and learning centers or participate in our 4-H programs. But it's interesting, and I'm going to give you just a snapshot of some of our numbers. The majority of our learners certainly skew to lifelong learners. They want information. They want to learn something to benefit their home or to benefit their livelihood or to benefit their family. So again, we really want to focus on the continuum of learners. I mentioned we also do provide a great deal of services to the people of the state of Maine. How many of you have had the unfortunate interaction with a tick here in the state of Maine? I see more hands up than people who have gone to Aroostook County. That is unfortunate. Many folks across the state know extension for one thing. It's I can send my tick into the tick lab and have it be identified, number one, and then have it be tested for Lyme disease and other diseases, and that's certainly the case. I mentioned that we do derive some state appropriations, and we actually derived a bond, or were part of a bond referendum in 2018 that really established our diagnostic and research laboratory. It sits off of Stillwater Avenue behind Dysart's and under one roof, and I think this is fascinating, and it's probably one of only a handful of labs like this across the United States. Is under one roof, we have scientists who are studying plant health, animal health, pest and disease health. And again, it's those hallway conversations. It's how do we maximize the work that we're doing together. But I also like to call this lab the people's lab, because it doesn't matter if you are one person who had, found a tick from your hike, or if you're an industry or a company, you can come here and we can help you, again, provide an answer, do some research, provide education, and again, think about it under one roof. And again, We have folks across campus, across certainly the system, and across the state who are also collaborating with our faculty and staff within our DRL, again, on the important work that they are doing under that group. Our 5 critical issue areas, as I mentioned before, our funding from Smith-Lever. We talk about our 5 critical issue areas, and this is where we report. If you look at these 5 critical issue areas, how are they not also the future of the state of Maine? How are they not also probably 5 of the most critical issue areas here on campus as we look at the Mitchell Center and sustainability and the well-being of people in the natural world? It's all found in these issues. And so again, it's not just extension working on these issues, and these aren't just our critical issue areas. They are all of our critical issue areas, whether you are a resident of the state of Maine, whether you are a student or faculty or staff member here at the University of Maine. I think these are very important. And so I want to put this out there because again, it's not just our work, it's all of our work. And think about how many across campus would see themselves in these 5 issue areas and the work that they do. So of that, I know some people love data, and I love to provide unusual data because I feel like we can tell the same old story or we can tell different stories. If we think about the work that's done traditionally on a college campus or a university campus like this, how do we get information out to people? It's usually through research and research articles and publications and presentations like this. You know, in extension, we again have to think about how do we get this information out to people who will understand it and utilize it. And I think that's one thing certainly that extension does very well. And certainly, you know, part of what we can collaborate more so with folks on campus is how do we get this information to others? These were numbers from 2021 as far as our digital outreach, 3.1 million views on our various websites. Again, that's a significant impact. We have 700 free research-based publications that are available on our website. So again, if you want to learn how to do a lot of different things, probably have you covered. In COVID, we became certainly the Google of the people of the state of Maine as people turned to backyard gardening, as they turned to outdoor recreation, as they turned to a lot of things that they had never encountered before. Again, the resurgence of extension was pretty exciting during this time period. We are very proud that we have the 10 most watched YouTube videos on the University of Maine YouTube channel. How to boil a lobster, I still think is number 1 with 2 million views, but how to prune your raspberry bushes might be a close second. But again, how are people accessing the information that is here on campus? Think about that as you think about your own work, as you think about your own research or your own teaching. How could it be more broadly shared with folks who might really benefit from it? Our volunteers, I think this is an incredible statistic too. So when we think about the University of Maine and the connections to the University of Maine, we couldn't do what we do without our volunteers. And we have, again, these were last year's numbers. We had about 5,000 volunteers across the state of Maine who volunteered more than 90,000 hours to our programs. Again, we couldn't do what we do or have the scope of what we do without these volunteers. Those volunteers don't realize that they are a part of the University of Maine in their volunteering. Again, how do we capitalize on that as well and engage these volunteers in more than just their volunteer, whatever they came into? Is there an opportunity to engage more broadly with campus? And I also want to talk about our Maine Harvest for Hunger program, because again, I think it is such a great example of taking a need. So we have a huge food insecurity need in the state of Maine. We have a huge issue around food insecurity. Where is the research coming from? The university around food insecurity. Certainly, there have been some wonderful talks here at the Mitchell Center, some wonderful work done. We've been a part of that, but it's then how do you take that research and mobilize it? How do you put it to work for our local communities and for the people who need it most? And again, this is just one program, one example. I could give you a dozen others, but I think it's really critical because again, what does the research say? How do we best communicate it? How do we best get people involved? And what is the outcome of that? The outcome of that is over 3.3 million pounds of fresh fruit and vegetables have been harvested and donated to people who need it most across the state of Maine. Again, that's where we need to think boots on the ground. What can we do here on campus, but again, make an impact across the state. So what have we learned in 108 years? A lot. Valuable life lessons learned. What we've learned, and I kind of put this in 3 different buckets: what works, what does not work, and what can we improve. What works is, we like to say Maine is one big small town. The connections here in Maine are extraordinary. And so I don't feel like there isn't one corner of this state that we couldn't figure out how to get a University of Maine person involved in what is going on. There's probably work that's already being done in that county. How do we drill down? The connections here are incredible. It's one of the reasons why I love working here so much. We're never going to run out of needs in our communities in the state of Maine. I don't see that happening anytime in the near future as we think about those big areas that we're focused in, especially around climate change. And we talk about sustainability and all those things that go along. The needs are only going to continue. Again, there's great capacity for us to play a role in those needs. UMaine is recognized across the state that this work is important, and also that we do already have a statewide presence. We aren't having to move into communities and feel like, from a community standpoint, that, oh, big bad Orono is coming into town and taking over. No, we already have University of Maine people in those communities. Again, how do we capitalize on that? I think it's also important to mention this as I'm talking about UMaine's recognition. I think it's also important to talk about UMaine as an institution and the philosophy that UMaine has remained true to those land grant missions of teaching, research, and outreach. As I mentioned, I was a part of a different land grant where I received my master's and my PhD, much larger land grant institution. And again, when your focus is to be a global research, entity, or to be a top 3 public institution, that comes at a cost of losing those traditional ideas around how are we really helping our local communities. And I think the University of Maine is really in a sweet spot as far as our size and as far as our focus as an institution in the important work of getting out and, again, helping our communities. And I think that is extraordinary and still works to this day. What doesn't work are the idea of silos, and that it's only our work and not your work. Or, as I like to say, sometimes we get divided in, well, you do research over here and you do that outreach stuff over there. We do have silos in our work. And again, how do we bridge those silos? How do we crack some of those walls? And I will have to say, again, people kind of look at me strange when I say this, but COVID actually had some positives. And one of the positives is walls came down quickly and we all figured out how to work together to meet needs. I'm hoping that we can continue to capitalize on that energy and momentum that we had through COVID, and just, again, how do we figure this out together versus I'm going to do it over here and you're going to do it over here. There's no time for redundancy. There's no reason why we should be doing it. We should be partnering it. There is, I don't know if you've heard this before, a divide between sometimes academic and non-academics. And, well, what does this mean for my tenure packet? Well, I don't, that's the work I do over here is more important than, outreach over there. I think we need to really think about, again, how do we work together on all of these things and again, kind of break that divide. The other thing, and I say this, I realize this is going to be recorded, and so I'm going to choose my words carefully with this, but then I'm not, because I've had this conversation at all levels, is the university sometimes has a one-size-fits-all approach, and what works here on campus may not work as we get out into our communities as far as how do we engage people, what does this research look like, what do we do? And so we really have to think about it. And I will have to say, even in the last 3 years that I've been here in my role, I think the university and the University of Maine System is more cognizant of that and has really done a good job of trying to work with us, again, to meet some of these needs when we don't fit the policy or the guideline that's currently in place. What can we improve? Communication. I always say, in the absence of communication, people will create the narrative. And I think we just need to share more of what we do. One of the great things about Maine is we are a humble
people. One of the bad things about Maine and working at the University of Maine is that we are a humble people. We need to share more of what we are doing. We need to, again, put ourselves out there and say, I'd love to partner in this work. So I really think, and that's one of the things that I really try to do is how do we show up at meetings like this or take the opportunities to engage in opportunities like this? Because again, the more we put ourselves out there and the more we hear about the work, the more we have these conversations, I feel like the more collaborations that will happen. Again, how do we share our connections and our networks? And the recognition, and the recognition isn't that we all want gold stars and press releases done or anything like that. I think the recognition is a couple different ways that I had it in my mind is, again, in our tenure and promotion packets for faculty, how is this actually rewarded? And a lot of times service or outreach is kind of the afterthought. How do we bring that more to the forefront, especially when our research may actually inspire what we do for outreach, and the same goes for our teaching. So I think we really need to think about what this looks like in our tenure and promotion packets as far as recognition. I think the other thing though too is I think it's important to recognize the important work that is happening across the state by the University of Maine, and a lot of times it goes unrecognized, it goes unsung, and so it's just making people aware that, hey, we did this program with this local school, or hey, we engaged this nonprofit or this community planning board or whoever it is. Again, I think we just need to have more of these conversations. Just being aware of time, I've mentioned this a couple of times throughout this talk. It's not just Extension's job to do this all, it's all of our work. I think the Mitchell Center does an amazing job. And again, I do feel like we are kindred spirits in this work because, as I got this quote from one of the publications, I feel like this is exactly what I just tried to say Extension does, just a little more articulate because again, people say quotes and words better than I do. I feel like, and David mentioned this, we have a new joint position with the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. We're very proud of this. And again, there's more opportunities for positions like this across not only campus, but across the system as well. If we think about it, our traditional joint positions used to be with natural sciences, forestry, and agriculture, and certainly a majority of our joint positions are with NSFA. But there's great opportunities. Again, how do we do outreach and engagement with an extension appointment? So we're very pleased, obviously, with our joint appointment with CLIS. We have a new joint appointment with the Maine Business School, with Cooperative Extension as well, and certainly have had conversations with other entities as far as what could this look like in the future. I love to say this, because we can play on Maine quite a bit. But if you think about your own research and education program, and again, what your passion is, as I mentioned before, I'm a Merced County kid who grew up on a farm, and that's driven a lot of what I've done and where my passion lies. What's the main focus of your teaching and research? How does it tie in to a local community need here across the state? And then how can we help connection with that? How can we continue to have those conversations? Because again, it's not just Extension's work to do this, even though I sometimes change the mission of a land grant to teaching, research, and extension. It's teaching, research, and outreach. And Extension certainly doesn't have, we certainly can't do it all ourselves at all. We certainly need more people involved in the process. People say, but wait, how would I know what's out there? How would I know what the needs are in the state of Maine? And I'm just sharing these because they've actually been researched and they are out there. And so I've put just a handful of the ones that I knew and the ones that are most relevant. Many of you are aware of Maine Won't Wait, the governor's climate action plan. Again, if you want to know what the teaching and research needs are across the state of the Maine, they're outlined in that plan. And I think the other thing is we talk about budgets and money. A lot of these plans come with opportunities to apply for, to look at obtaining external dollars through agencies and through other entities. The University of Maine, and the University of Maine System actually did release right before the pandemic a research and development plan. And again, if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to look at that. There is a 10-year economic development plan that the state of Maine released, again, right before the pandemic, but it's still really valuable if you go through it. And again, we'll give you some really great ideas as far as research needs here in the state. Many of you may know about the Maine project, the Forestry Opportunity Roadmap project, which a lot of this campus has been involved in. And then after COVID, the governor put together an economic recovery committee, and they have a plan as well. Again, with specific and actionable applied research areas that people could get involved in and community needs, they are listed. The Maine State Chamber of Commerce just released a workforce development plan. I wasn't able to, I actually lost room on my slide, but there's a lot of these plans that are out there. And again, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. You know, folks have been brought together to develop these different plans, and it would be interesting, again, if you want some light reading and have some interest, to seek out the one that you think might best align with your interest areas to see, you know, what are the needs in those areas. So with that, it's going to be about 40 minutes. I'm at 43 minutes, but still plenty of time for questions and conversation. Here's my email address. Please feel free to reach out. I'm always available. I'm happy to answer any questions now, or certainly if they come to you afterwards. And again, wanted to leave you with Margaret Mead's wonderful quote about how we're all going to change the world. So thank you so much for your attention. I look forward to some questions.
Let's all give her a hand. That was just a marvelous, marvelous talk.
You hit the stop share button at the top there? I could. Will be great. Because we don't trust David with the.
Yeah. So I know people just were learned so much from your talk. Learned so much from the things that you were saying. I know that I certainly did, and I grew up at Ames, Iowa, next to Iowa State, one of the early sites, and I learned more from your talk than all those years in growing up.
Wonderful.
In Ames. So you mentioned so many different things that people will be interested in. One of the things that you talked about was the importance of a local presence, that really makes a difference. If we're not able to go places, say during the pandemic, are there strategies that you've invented or you're thinking about that capture sort of the importance of a local presence in a difficult time?
Absolutely. And again, I feel like we have so many examples through certainly COVID. You know, we learned a lot about technology, and again, being a 108-year-old organization. And one of my favorite stories is, many of you may be familiar, we have a Master Gardener program. That's where we derive a lot of our volunteers from. And for years it was said, oh, the Master Gardener program could never be put online because it's all about learning about plants and growing plants and whatnot. And we figured out a way to put it online, and it's wildly successful and popular, and it's really well done. And so I feel like, again, if we can't get to the local communities physically, we can still get there virtually. And that's one of the greatest things about, again, having a local presence is, if somebody's sitting here on Maine campus but has a question or wants to engage locally, can we bring people into our extension office and sit them around our conference table and have a conversation, you know, with people who are here on campus? And we've certainly done that in different instances with people that want to be engaged in different areas, whether it's a programmatic area or geographic area across the state.
Thank you. That's very interesting. You talked in your presentation about your strong digital outreach and how much people are downloading and learning from the different things that you put up digitally. There are people in the state who are really worried and thinking a lot about rural communities and their lack of access to digital resources. Is Cooperative Extension involved in thinking about that, or is that something that's important for us to be thinking about?
It absolutely is. And again, we all know this. I live 4 miles from Orono, and I cannot be on email and streaming something at the same time. I mean, it's not just a rural community issue. I think it's a state of Maine issue, depending on where you live. And we have that, we go back and forth, because certainly we have folks who will only go online to receive information and to download information or to look up a video on their phone. And we have some people who just do not have that ability to even, they don't have a smartphone, or they don't have that ability. And so how do we manage it? And how do we still make it, you know, we're all about access to information as well. So this is probably one area where we do, I don't want to say we are redundant, but we still are keeping, if you want the paper version mailed to you, we are going to do that. But if you want the digital download, we'll send that link to you as well. But one of the best stories, and I'm just going to share this because, again, it's figuring out how to meet the needs of people where they are. Again, we all went into lockdown during COVID. And as I said, our wonderful faculty and staff figured out ways to pivot. And we actually had faculty and staff who put together aquaponics kits, you know, feed your fish, grow your lettuce kind of aquaponics systems. And they put these kits together and mailed them out to youth across the state to participate in this project. You know, again, so as a family, you could put together your kit, very hands-on, again, very labor intensive on all areas. But again, that team won a national award for their innovativeness in education. And again, the impacts that they had of that project through COVID. So again, just trying to, as we all do, try to meet the needs of our learners where they're at, whether you're in a college classroom or whether your learners are spread out across the state.
Very, very interesting. One of the, if you happen to read today's Bangor Daily News, the lead article on the front page was about PFAS, the forever chemicals. And that's, of course, very important as we think about our land in Maine and other things. How's Cooperative Extension involved, or are there things that you were doing in that area?
Yes, it is. And again, we could spend several presentations talking about this, and I know several presentations will be happening and certainly are happening. It's interesting, as I mentioned about Cooperative Extension, we are built on science-based information. We aren't just go out and say what Joe Smith said because we like Joe. We were like, what does the science tell us? And again, how do we translate that science to people in a way that they need it? And so we all know PFAS is a huge issue here in the state of Maine. And what it's been an interesting, and I say this, it's been an interesting exercise because where is the research? You know, people call our extension offices, they call our faculty and staff. Homeowners want to know if they can plant their garden. Farmers want to know if they can plant their crop. And we say, we don't have the science. Like, we're working on it. And certainly our colleagues in NSFA are working on it. And so it was a great opportunity to come together and say, okay, what do we know? And where is the science? And there has been some research that's been done. We talked to those researchers. Again, it's that collaborative network. We have some folks here on campus that have been involved in PFAS research. Again, how do we collectively come together? And how do we share that information so we're not making promises, so we're not giving people false hopes or false information? And so we've had to be really careful about, again, what does the science say and how do we share that? The good news is, you know, we have more and more folks, you know, within Extension, within NSFA, across campus that are working on this issue. And again, more states across the United States that are also working on it and have come together. And interestingly enough, USDA has also finally come on board and providing some opportunities for some research funding, which will spur even more research. So.
And those of you that have access to the chat, you'll see that there's some nice information that has been put in about these issues. So take a look at that. So question, there are cooperative extensions across the country, and you're part of an overall network. Do you get to talk to each other? Do you learn from each other across states? And does that operate?
It does, and I think that's really important. We actually have a Northeast Extension we have a Northeast Extension region. Now, Northeast in this aspect is West Virginia to Maine, which usually we think about Northeast as New England, but we have a little bit of a broader reach. We get together on a monthly basis, and more so if there are some larger issues, and that would be my colleagues from across the Northeast. I just returned the first week of September. Our first in-person meeting since the pandemic was our National Extension Deans and Directors group, and it was wonderful opportunity to come back together. Again, much like any of your academic disciplines or whatever unit, there's the association of this and the association, it's the same. And it is a great opportunity to share information and to share what's happening in other states. And again, how can we partner, especially in the state of Maine? We are smaller. If you think about our larger colleagues, I think about, again, Iowa State University or Cornell or, some of the larger land grants. And again, how does Maine, as we look at responding to some of these, we do so in partnership with our colleagues at UNH or Vermont or Massachusetts. And so it's a great opportunity. And I would consider those colleagues, again, not only just trusted colleagues, but actually great friends as you gather together. I don't know if you all do this in your friend group and talk about the issues that you're dealing with and how you're responding to them. And it's great to have that group of colleagues to do so with.
Thank you. The Maine is changing, as are other states, and one of the ways that we're changing is we have a larger number of refugees and immigrants that are a part of our state now, and that we're all learning from. What kind of connection or contact has Cooperative Extension had with newcomers in Maine?
Why I'm smiling is I'm very proud of the work that we are doing in this area. And again, certainly we're only doing a fraction of the work that needs to be done. And there are great opportunities for partnerships and collaborations. But the two examples that came immediately to mind is we have a wonderful 4-H program in inner city Portland, working with new Mainer populations and children. And again, it goes back to that original intent of cooperative extension and 4-H. How do we get information back to parents? And it's through a lot of times their children. How do we build networks among these communities? And we have such a vibrant group down in Portland, and just some extraordinary work happening at Portland High School with immigrant youth. And again, how do we connect them and give them that sense of place in that Maine? Yes, we talk about being from away, but how do we give kids the opportunity to feel connected here in the state of Maine? The other program that came to mind is we have a beginning farmer and rancher network program that certainly Extension plays a role in, but a lot of different ag organizations across the state play a role in that, and it's amazing. We are able to connect with new Mainers who come in for agricultural pursuits. And that is really interesting too, because Maine is one of those states still that, I don't know how long this is going to be the case, but you could come into the state and buy land and have a small scale ag operation and again, make a living for your family. And again, how are those populations connecting to support structures and infrastructure to allow them to, again, live their Maine dream?
We've just heard so many wonderful things from you. The Maine Harvest for Hunger, the work with new farmers, thinking about farms staying financially doable, just all kinds of different things. If we wanted to follow you around and learn more, what might we see? What's one thing we didn't hear about that it's important? And if there's anything, that's fine.
Oh my gosh. It's one thing is mean to even ask. I think it's, it's one of those things that we have something for you. Like, again, no matter if you were to follow, say, all right, Hannah, I want to go out with you one day and learn about extension. My first question is, again, what are you passionate about? What's going to excite you? And I can guarantee that we will have something, or we will know of somebody that has something that fits into your area. And I think that's what makes Extension so unique, is that we have that opportunity to do so. So I don't think we could turn away anybody and say, yeah, we don't have anything to show you here. I think probably what the problem would be is trying to define, just one or a handful of things to show you.
That's just so exciting and so wonderful. David, I used up all our time. Are there questions in the main room?
No worries, Linda. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
So here, please.
COVID is known to have set learners throughout the country back in terms of literacy, as well as other standard benchmarks. So how is Cooperative Extension reacting to this and or possibly combating this? Because just when you mentioned like sending out kits,
Yeah.
How do you send out kits to kids who maybe aren't able to read and should be able to?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And again, we have some wonderful, our faculty and staff working in our 4-H youth development program are really, working in partnership with, again, experts on campus who are probably doing this from a research, like what does this look like and how do we build our programs that could address some of the research needs that you're seeing, a decrease in math scores, a decrease in reading scores. What could we do? I always think about this too, and one of the things through COVID is, you didn't have to be a member of our 4-H program to participate in our 4-H programming. We did a wonderful series. It was the Quarantine Science Cafes, and anybody could join in and listen to a researcher from on campus who really just wanted to share how awesome their research was, to engage, again, mostly a high school population. And again, are these disengaged? We heard, so many of our students were disengaged. They didn't want to spend the full day in front of their computer. They wanted to be, more connected. And so how, in our way, and again, we're not going to reach the majority of students, but what can we do in the space that we work in to reach the students that are going to come into our 4-H programs because they're already one of our 4-Hers? Or a lot of times we had our 4-Hers bring in their friends because, hey, you would enjoy this or you would like this. And so I think it's just that opportunity to think about where do we have the access and what are we going to do with that access? And if we need, again, support from our research colleagues on campus to say, what is the research saying? We're going to build that into our programs to try to make them as impactful as possible.
So I have lots of questions, but I'm going to have to save them because we're at time. Let's thank Hannah one more time for it.
I'm going to give a shout out to Lynn Holland, who is, again, Lynn, you're amazing to offer up all the connections and whatnot. But thank you all for joining in this afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity.